let's play this clip about from AOC. Now, what's happening with the stimulus bill at this point is the House was hoping to approve the Senate passed stimulus bill by voice vote, and apparently a congressman from Kentucky, Massey, has threatened that he will basically, and all it takes is one member to say, I object to a voice vote. And then you got to actually do a roll call vote, but you need to be present to do the roll call vote. I guess that's the difference. I mean, I don't know the specific rules, but that's my understanding. And so right now you have about, at least you need, I think like 219 House members to be present to establish, to vote for, in a specific vote, to vote for it in Washington, D.C. And so this jackass is making everybody go back there. They're all obviously going to pass it. But I mean, on some level, I mean, I don't understand how somebody does that. I really don't understand. It's one thing if they're all going back to vote against it and they're trying to get a better bill. But here is, let's talk about AOC is on the, she was on the House floor, and she's talking about this Senate bailout bill, which, as we mentioned earlier, it is going to reshape the country. Now, presumably, we're going to get other bites at this apple, right? I mean, that's certainly what folks like Sanders and Warren are putting out there, and other progressives in the Democratic caucus, that there's going to be another chance to do this. And I would imagine there's going to be. But there's no reason to believe that it's not going to follow this form once you establish it, right? And but here is AOC talking about this bill.
What did the Senate majority fight for? One of the largest corporate bailouts with as few strings as possible in American history. Shameful. The greed of that fight is wrong for crumbs for our families. And the option that we have is to either let them suffer with nothing, or to allow this greed and billions of dollars, which will be leveraged into trillions of dollars, to contribute to the largest income inequality gap in our future. There should be shame about what was fought for in this bill and the choices that we have to make.
Now, here's the thing, right? If the House doesn't approve it, it's the Democrats' fault.
Yeah. Right?
Because they control the House. But if the Senate doesn't approve it, it's the Republicans' fault. And so, the failure, I think, happens in the Senate. I mean, obviously it's tougher because they have a majority there. Mm-hmm. But it just, Chuck Schumer did, it's just, this is a bad job. They did a bad job. And the only thing that Chuck Schumer was bragging about is that they managed to make sure that, no members of Congress and no family members of the president can get access to the slush fund. Of course, real estate got $170 billion tax break in this. So of course they're getting their piece. It's stunning. The failure is just stunning.
I subscribe to these like lobbyist report, there's reporters and they have these email lists that go out every day. And one tracks, what lobbyists are doing in Washington. They have amped up so much during this crisis. And if you don't subscribe to these, I don't love Politico, but they do have a decent lobbyist report. So take a look at it. They've amped up their lobbying in Washington to, I don't think I've seen this in the last 10 years, this level of lobbying that's happening right now. And that should be an indicator. In preparation for the stimulus, they brought on all their lobbying firms, everything from the restaurant trades, and some of it's very understandable. Of course, they all want a piece of it, but it's that big money. We know exactly who's going to get the biggest piece of it. And Schumer, you're in such a bubble right now that you're listening to these guys over the crisis that's in front of you. It is so hard to ignore the urgency of this crisis and what we're about to face. And for him to make a conscious decision to, once again, give tax breaks to real estate. who don't need these tax breaks because in New York in particular, they haven't paid taxes in how long?
Right. Well, I mean, I think, that's an argument why you need people in there. I mean, I think, in the context of the normal day to day, there's an opportunity to push people based upon, the constituency. Like I think easier to push Joe Biden on some things than it would be on Donald Trump, because Donald Trump has to respond to the Republican Party. Joe Biden has to respond to the Democratic Party, let's say. But particularly in moments like these, where it's a crisis, where there are sort of like exogenous forces that are creating pressure because it's a crisis, you need people who have some type of like foundational um, disposition against this stuff to
Mhm.
withstand that type of pressure, and to just like conceive of a bill that doesn't start with corporate bailouts, and then goes on to where the people are, but rather it goes the opposite way. And we don't have that. That's the problem. We just don't have that.
How much worse can it get? I just, it's really hard for my mind to even, I can't wrap my mind around the fact that like we already have the starkest income inequality since 1929. CEOs are already making hundreds of times more than they did
Yep.
15 years ago. How much worse could it get? Are we just going to privatize the entire economy for four monopolies? Is New York, I mean, I think they're seeing, thank God Naomi Klein's talking about this, but the disaster capitalism here.
Yep. Of course. That's exactly what's going on. And we saw it. Look, we saw it in New Orleans after Katrina. We saw, I think it could be all charter schools down there now.
Yeah.
And we saw a lot of residents were basically prevented from returning.
Mhm.
The real estate developers went in there and made, high end condo, buildings. And I mean, this is in many respects, obviously there's no damage to physical structures, but in terms of the structures of our economy, that's what is so problematic about this. It is not just the lack of generousness to people. And part of that is just like we don't have a society that is built in such a way that you could step in and fix this thing, right? Like, so for instance, Denmark is paying employers, they'll pay 90% of their of the employer's or I should say the employee's salary
Yeah.
if the employer pays them to stay home.
UK
So
is discussing it right now. I mean, the UK is discussing a very similar measure at 80%.
and 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 the thing is that like, okay, then the question becomes like, what about people who aren't working? What about people who were laid off 2 months ago? What about, but they already have systems that deal with that.
That's right.
Those, they have pre-existing systems. Like, so we have a situation here. It's like, what happens to the healthcare? Okay, we had 3 million people lose their jobs last week.
Last week. Yeah.
This week, we're probably going to have 6 million people lose their jobs.
Mhm.
It could be more. In the course of 2 weeks, we're going to have about 2.5 weeks. We could have about 10 million people lose their jobs. Where do they go for healthcare?
Right.
Like, just like what system can absorb these people? Like, even if tomorrow we said everybody gets into Medicaid, how are they going to go and sign up for Medicaid?
Yeah.
Like, they're like, we don't have the apparatus for this. We have no structures to deal with any of this. And I don't know where people are going to get their health care. It's going to, you're in like four different, sort of tiers. Some people might be able to pay for Cobra with the money they get from the extended unemployment insurance. Some people might qualify for the ACA. And maybe they'll have to have some type of special provision for the ACA. Some people might qualify for Medicaid. I mean, it is like just sorting through that in a time of crisis is just bizarre.
We
Like,
can't even handle our taxes right now. I mean,
exactly. I mean, we have no underlying processes. And this, this is the ventilators. It is all there's a lot of ideology involved in this, but this is the sort of the illustration of the problem that we have in this country is just sort of like, you hear people like, I don't want Medicaid waste and Medicare fraud and this and that. And like, there's too much slack in the system. And, the bottom line is that this is a metaphor. What's happening to our society is a metaphor to what happens to the individual. That's been happening all the time. Like there's just no room for them. Like everything is so precarious, and even emergency measures cannot cover it because we don't have enough of a foundation to deal with this. And that's what happens in people's individual lives, and it happens society wide in something like this. And I think we're at the beginning of this. I think we're at the beginning of it from a health perspective, and I think we're at the beginning of this, obviously, from an economic perspective. And I think it's just gonna get worse.
What I don't see though, and I'm trying to figure out, I mean, as much as I can, their game plan. What do they plan to privatize? I understand. Okay, so if everybody's moving out of New York because they can't pay their rents and they're not freezing rent, Cuomo refuses to freeze rent, guys. Just so you know, your savior, your crush, Cuomo, won't freeze rent in New York right now, but he's protected mortgages. And I guess that helps the small units if somebody owns a smaller multifamily unit and they need that rent to pay the mortgage. I guess there's an argument there, but you could do both if you weren't owned by real estate. Right. So, New York, for instance, I get it. Like people are going to move out of New York. They're already doing so. They could, we're already at that point in New York, and that might happen in other cities like it did with New Orleans, like Puerto Rico. No one pays attention to Puerto Rico, but they're doing massive developing there, and people are leaving the island more and more. So it's sort of a changed economy in Puerto Rico now. But how does that happen on a national level? And how does it happen in the midst of a crisis? I mean, by the time of the election, I don't even think we're going to be done with this crisis. I think, we're going to have waves of quarantines if you're listening to what Fauci's saying. And there's going to be hot spots. The hot spots are likely to be cities, with Democratic voters. I'm trying to game this out and understand, where is the profit making?
Well, I think, I think there is no what is their strategy. The their, THEIR, are disparate players who are specifically looking for their own interests, but they have an advantage in society. The Fed is now giving them $4 trillion worth of loan ability. And look, I'm a crappy businessman, but if the Fed loans me $10 million, basically interest free, I'm going to make a ton of money. I'm going to make money even if I just put it in a CD, but I'll go out and I'll buy a building in New York. I'll buy like a 4-person, 4-family unit in New York or something, or 3-family unit. And the money up front is the tough part. And within a year or two, I'll have rent coming in. I'll be able to service any type of loan I get to replace the loan that I got to pay back. And boom, I'm in. And I'm making money. And that's, this is a very narrow, example. But the point is that you're giving money to people who are already well positioned to take advantage of this situation. So like I say, everybody else is driving under the yellow flag, and you get a free pit stop, and they fill you up with gas, and they say, okay, everybody else has got to go 35 miles an hour under this yellow flag. You can go 120 miles an hour. And it's just, all the wealth is going to continue to concentrate, and it's just going to sort of exponentially feed off itself.
Think about automation on top of it. Have you thought about this? Just the workforce that's likely to be obliterated in multiple industries, and they've been trying to figure out how to automate and lay off. I mean, here you go. Here's a great opportunity. Cut your costs.
I mean, that's what I was saying. That's what I was sort of alluding to with the Amazon thing. Automation is part of it. This is going to change the structure of the workforce. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to end up working from home after this that hadn't before. I would imagine 10 to 15% of the jobs that used to go into an office are going to be working at home because people are going to say like, oh, we were able to do X, Y, and Z. Now that's going to, I don't know if I want to do that, frankly, work from home, for the rest. I personally, I don't know if I would care, but You know, it's going to change the nature of our society in some ways. And you know, talk about like the idea that we were already becoming more distant, and it is going to, you know, it's going to create a narrower band of worker power that exists only in those jobs that you have to be there for. I think on some level, those are the ones that are least likely, obviously, to be you work from home.
Mhm.
Uh, I think there's, I don't, it's hard to say where all this is going, but um, you know,
And you're going to have
hopefully,
a massive number of people who are unemployed. I mean, who aren't able to shift into the new economy or whatever the next bullshit is and get trained in the new jobs. You know, there's always going to have, you're always going to have, you know, older populations who are, you know, shifted out of the labor force for whatever reasons. But it's going to be massive. And I mean, regardless of whether or not these businesses rebuild, even in the next couple of years will be massive. And we don't have the infrastructures you just said to protect our citizens. We already have a problem. If you don't want to spend on, you know, government spending, then don't put yourself in a scenario like this.